She is a meditation author. She writes about sacred dance. She's got a new book out called, I think is it called Sacred Dance? Sacred
It's called
Dance Meditation?
Sacred Dance
Yes, Sacred Dance Meditation. It's got, I think, 365 dances from around the world.
Correct.
It's 365 dances from around the world that you can practice for every day of the year, something like that. That
That's
sounds pretty cool. And as far as I understand, Carla has written several books about the law of attraction and things like that, and manifesting money and things like that. So we're going to have a conversation. We're just going to explore some of these topics. And I'm excited to have you on the podcast today. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation. I'm very, very excited to be here.
Okay, good. Do you have, just as a question, because I love to start our interviews and podcasts with breath work. Have you ever tried a breath work?
Sure, of
Yeah.
course. Uh-huh.
So I like to start them with the breath work because it gives kind of like a feeling of like energy in the body. And I find that it makes us feel more present for our conversation. Would you want to join me for like a 2-minute breath work?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. So the way that I like to do, it's a very intense breath work where you do very deep, rapid breathing first, and then you hold the breath out after the rapid breathing, and then so you're like empty of air, like a full exhale. And then when you can't hold that exhale any longer, you take a deep, deep breath and hold that in for as long as you can, and then we could go into the conversation. So it's sort of like the Bellows breath pranayama, or it was popularized by someone named Wim Hof recently. And let's just try this now. You want to start
Sure.
now? Okay,
Yeah.
let's do it. Now I'm going to hold the breath out as long as I can. You can join me. You can feel tingling in your body as you hold the breath out. Just be present with your body. Feeling everything from the head to the toes. And then when you can't hold it any longer, take a deep breath in. Hold the breath in. And just feel the entire body full of air. Just being completely present, feeling your entire body here in this moment. And then when you can't hold that any longer, just go back into normal breathing. I love to do that at the beginning of conversation, just to get a little bit of that buzz, the body tingling, and just present. Sometimes at the beginning of a podcast, I feel anxious, like wanting to make sure that I say the right things, ask the right questions, present myself in a certain way. But I really prefer when I can just go into it with presence and not really worrying about any of that stuff, and just being present with another person, a beautiful soul, Carla Walter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
Carla, Carla has written. I think I mentioned this earlier about sacred dance and meditation. So, Carla, I'd like to start with that. What brought you to writing about this? What has your path been to writing about dance meditation?
That's a very interesting question, and it's very
Mhm.
convoluted. I started dance when I was a young girl, and initially I began dancing because it just was a lot of fun, and my family, we were very much into the arts and dancing and music and so forth. But over time, I realized that dance was something that I could do and really provide me with that meditative space. Of course, when I was a teenager, I didn't know that that's what was happening, but I found myself really enjoying the feeling and the level of what we call now a meditation or a trance state that happened when I danced. And it didn't matter whether I was, dancing in a social setting or whether I was doing a choreographed dance with a class or what have you. So, and just throughout my young adult and adult life, I've always been a dancer. My underlying practice has been ballet for a very long time, and of course, I've at the same time been a spiritual seeker again since I was a young girl. And so I tried many of the different, religious practices that were available sort of in the mainstream as I was growing up. And, some of them basically forbid you to dance. And I just kind of thought, well, that's a little strange,
Yeah.
especially since dance is really a way to connect. So over time, I've just really continued dancing, and then and had a company of my own, and offered lots of different sort of performances. And then I had the opportunity to get my doctorate degree in dance history and theory, and that sort of opened the door to where I am now. So that's a whole hour long conversation there. But let's just say I was inspired by what I've learned about the power of dance and how it makes me feel very connected to spirit when I do dance. So
Wow. Yeah, that's so it became sort of this spiritual practice for you. It kind of reminds me of the way that like the whirling dervishes found spirituality in their bodies, like in the movement of their bodies. And I know dance meditation, and it has is sort of a widespread thing that is all over the world. And in places like Bali, I know that they sort of integrate dance into their spiritual practices.
mhm.
Um, in your new book, you present 365 dance meditations from around the world, and it kind of as someone who is into anthropology, that was my major in high school, in college, I mean. I love to like learn about different cultures, and I wanted to know how did you come across all of these different dance meditations? Did you learn them by traveling around the world? Did you learn them through books? Like, how did you come across all of these different world dance meditations?
That's a really good question, and I want to just sort of say, one of the chapters, I think it's November, has the dervishes as part of the experience. But really, the way that I chose these had to do with the flow of human evolution, and or what I perceive it to be, and from an anthropological and archaeological perspective,
Mm,
right? So I started by kind of trying to figure out what's happening with sacred dance and where is it around the world. And what I found was looking for sacred dance as it occurred pre-colonial times was a challenge. And so when I coupled the flow of human evolution, for example, from Africa around to the southern piece with the Mesoamericans and back up around through China and up through Mongolia and back around,
mm,
that um, it was just fascinating to see what was there. And so it was really connected to that availability of findings from an archaeological and anthropological perspective.
mm,
And it was really important to me that I find these dances that were not when when you hear the word pagan, right? For example, today we kind of take the word pagan as a thing. But it's sort of derogatory when you go back and you look at how it was used and why it was used. And so really what I wanted to do was to bring these dances back into the awareness and really you know, give honor to the ancestors who created these dances and what they were used for. And I
Mm.
also wanted to make sure we connected the dances with the cosmos and the seasons and different ways that we think about our universe. And of course, from the northern hemisphere, the people in the southern hemisphere have a different sort of timeline or a different way because their seasons are different from ours. But really to bring it home so that people nowadays can think about sacred dance as something that connects us as a human beings, and in a way that shows us that all of these histories that have been erased really should be resurrected, or at least resurrected and honored in practice, so we can sustain our earth. There was a lot of motivation for me to really just amplify these voices and to make sure that they are not lost.
Wow. So a lot of the sacred dances that you write about were actually from past cultures that are not existing anymore. Is that right?
Well, no, they still exist, but let's take, for example, Australia, right? The Aboriginal cultures. And when I say these words, Aboriginal or Indigenous, Native, those sorts of words are labels that we use to sort of say who we're talking about. But if you think about the cultures in Australia, these people are still there. They've been there for a very long time, and their culture has not been erased, even though there were certain attempts to do that. So the chapter that I have, or the month that we use, the Australian perspective, Austronesian dance, really gives honor to those peoples and brings forward what they have been doing for eons,
Mm.
and allows us to connect with them in a way that hopefully avoids placing them in a dualistic light where we think of them in a way that's maybe not the best way.
Mm.
So another one would be, for example, we talk about the Iberian culture, right? People don't think of Iberia as a culture. That was a really interesting research, tangent for me. But Iberian culture has these wonderful sacred dances, and bringing them forward. Nowadays, we think about Gaelic and those kinds of practices, but those are the Iberian people, and
Mm.
they had indigenous practices. So
Wow. That's fascinating. So, you when you studied these, were you studying these by actually going to those places and dancing with those people, or were you studying them more on anthropology kind of perspective, sort of like from afar?
in some cases, I was able to travel to the locations, not all of them, but I did travel to some. And I had a really interesting find when I was thinking about where to travel. So I've been to many places in Europe,
Mm.
and I've been to places in Canada and in the US and South America. But if you look at what we have right here in the US, there is a national monument in Sheridan, Wyoming, that is a testament to and a site for Mesoamerican dance, and it's been there for a very long time. It's a protected site. So we were able to go there. And of course, I was able to go to Hawaii several times, and that was a pleasure.
Mm.
For the rest, because our world has become very digital and we're able to access information from the internet, a lot of my research was able to be done through connecting with libraries and other cultural centers around the world. So
Mm.
it doesn't preclude me. Like one of my big desires is to go study some in Egypt and
Mm.
work with those folks, and then maybe also travel to. Everyone wants to go to the Incan cultures and see what's going on there, but
Yeah.
mhm.
Whoa, that's so cool. So when you what was your favorite place that you've traveled to learn these dances?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I would say Hawaii is my favorite place. Yeah.
Cool. What kind of dances did you learn there? What was your experience like?
So in Hawaii, okay, so you might know that some of my work, some of my publications have to do with the power of dance and advertising
Hmm,
and how dance is similarly used as music and as it evokes memories and nostalgic places and it connects, connects us to different parts of our lives and aspects of time. And so with doing that, you're able to connect that with a product and that product then becomes something that you purchase.
hmm,
That's a whole tangent that we can talk about later. But one of
yeah.
the things that happened with Hawaiian dance was the production of Hawaii 5-0, right? And Hawaiian culture has been produced in such a way to be mass distributed. The Hawaiian culture is only one, hip hop culture is another. There's plenty of them. But when I drill down in the Hawaiian dance and learn about what those dances actually signify for the people, it's not just, valorization of, movement of hips for the women, but the men have a very strong part to play in the sacred dance piece and the stories that are told through those dances and the markings on the bodies of the men and how the histories are actually embedded in their bodies through these markings and through these dances.
Hmm,
So when I was in Hawaii and being able to visit the cultural monuments and the historic locations, you begin to really see how the Hawaiians have these two different ways of dealing with their cultural history. One of them is exporting it for tourism and
hmm,
realization through advertising.
hmm.
Another is really preservation. So when you go to the different islands, you see these different ways. The Big Island is different from, Oahu, which is different from, Kauai, so on. And uh, the honoring of the dances with all the pieces that go with it. So not just the body markings and the movements, but also like the flowers and the flora and the fauna that we see that go with the dances. The wearing of the palms and so forth was fascinating to me. And in fact, for the Hawaiian dance chapter or section in the book, we talk a lot about the differences between male. I don't want to use male. Well, let's talk about masculine and feminine energies because they are equally important, but the dances are very codified for men and women and they complement one another. So in most of the dance practices in sacred dance meditation, there's just a general offering, but for the Hawaiian dance, there are two, male and female.
Wow. That's fascinating. It's interesting to hear, you talking about how sometimes they are focused on preserving the culture in like a non-commercial way and how they sometimes use it commercially. And I think that that's something I'd like to explore later in the conversation. But right now, you had mentioned a few minutes ago that you had sort of traced the roots of sacred dance, and it was hard to sort of trace it from pre-colonial times, but that you were tracing it sort of around the world. Do you think that sacred dance is something that sort of started somewhere in some culture and then spread around the world? Or do you think that it's something that is just part of human nature that has arisen in different places?
Really a great question. And what I would say for each of the cultures that I studied and are presented in this book, it's the funniest thing. There are these overlapping themes in each
Mm,
culture. And it's almost as if the cultures, I don't want to say they knew the same thing, even though they were on different sides of the globe at the same time.
mm,
But, for example, shamanism, right, or shamanism, as a thought or a way of being and honoring, is it shows up. in almost all of these dance cultures, these sacred dance cultures. Or when you talk about the relationship between human beings and their examination of, the heavens, right? When you're talking about stars and movement of the planets and so forth, many of them, all of them, in fact, have a relationship with the sky and how things are. And many of the dances actually, move in geographic space to kind of emulate what they saw in the sky.
Mm.
And some of them, I mean, after, the funniest thing is like, when you think about whether or not there are UFOs, you have people go, yes, there are, no, they're not, all these arguments. But once you finish studying these different sacred dances, you sort of come away going, yeah, there are,
Huh.
you know?
Huh.
So, and the
What
other, the other
what
piece,
makes you say that though? What makes you say that the sacred dances would indicate that there are UFOs? That's an interesting like conclusion to draw.
because when you start thinking about, when you look at what has been historically documented, and from anthropology and archaeology, these things are interpreted through the markings that are found and all of the pottery and other implements. When you look at them, you'll see, for example, for the Olmecs, a lot of their motifs have people, well, beings that are dressed in such a way that indicate that they have some sort of different sort of attire. Let's use that word as attire. Or we have motifs that show different kinds of vehicles, we'll call them vehicles, right? That have been codified in the artwork. And just the imagination of how we got the pyramids, and if you look at how the Egyptians, are situated with those pyramids there, and you look at what the Mayans have in terms of how they've constructed many of their societies, including their sacred dance spaces, relative to connections to beings from other planets. I mean, it's really hard for me to conclude that there wasn't some sort of, um, you know, extraterrestrial type of communication going on. And of course, when we start looking at other, we talk about Atlantis, we can also look into the ocean where we look at, for example, again, Australian culture where there's, or Austronesian culture where there's a huge set of documentation that talks about how the ocean plays a part in human existence and whether or not human beings were at one point part of a amphibious sort of you know uh, being. So the reason I love it so much is because that it helps us to not be so sure that we know what's going on and that we're so sure that there hasn't been some sort of extraterrestrial connection, and so sure that what we're told, um, we can't just buy it hook, line, and sinker. So it's amazing.
Yeah, wow. That's a fascinating perspective that you've gained through your research into dance. I want to take a moment to acknowledge some of the questions from the chat. Some people are asking. I'd like to ask one from Forrest. He asked, Dr. Carla, what are some of the dance meditation benefits you've personally experienced, or that you've heard from people who have followed your instructions?
Thanks. Well, I believe that the biggest, well, there's several benefits, but the main one is to turn off the thinking and to just be and to find that space. We call it a trance, and we started the conversation about dervishes and what that is doing for us. But the benefit is really to connect with your higher self, to really, let go of planning and thinking and imagining and worrying or being anxious or depressed, It also, sacred dance meditation is a very strong healer. It allows you to have the ability to connect an intention that you want to achieve with a movement. And so, we hear a lot about this notion of being mindful. And as we started the top of the hour with a breathing practice to help us really be grounded in our bodies, sacred dance meditation does the same thing for us throughout the day. So there are many benefits, and those are really the main purpose, and they are to help us remember that we're connected to spirit, that we don't need to plan and worry or fret, and that we don't have to be anxious, but also that, being in the present moment, and where this is where it's actually happening, not yesterday or tomorrow, and connecting our bodies and our dance movement in a sense of beauty can really help move us forward in whatever we're experiencing, whether it's recovery from grief or recovery from addiction, or whether or not we're, doing the effects of COVID-19 and so forth. There are these benefits that we can have from practicing sacred dance.
Wow. Yeah, so it's kind of similar to meditation. Well, I guess it is a meditation, but similar to other forms of meditation in that way, where it can connect you to the present moment, it can connect you to your body, and it can connect sort of almost like the body and mind coming together in like a powerful and beautiful way. It is kind of a beautiful thing to see that there's such different ways of meditating, that you could meditate sitting down completely, just sitting still, and you could meditate dancing feverishly. It's they're almost like opposite in your body, opposite ways of using your body, but at the same time coming to the same core, to the same conclusion, to the same source, to being in the present moment and experiencing existence here and now. I actually have noticed this at raves. Well, let's call them the festivals, actually, because I think raves are more like with lasers and indoors. But like music festivals, I've always found those to be some very profound spiritual experiences for me when I'm dancing. I get to a very meditative and deep spiritual state. Have you ever tried any of those, like festivals or raves or things like that, to
Oh,
experience the dancing from there?
yeah. So I also, let me just say that one of the other reasons about sacred dance meditation is for, there are a lot of people who just cannot, for whatever set of reasons, they can't sit still. That's not their thing. And, or they have a hard time, holding certain types of stretches or whatever. And they wind up feeling guilty because they feel like, they can't access. And so sacred dance is a way for people to access that. But of course, you know, I love to dance in the big spaces where there's a lot of social dancing going on or rave dancing, you know. And one of the things I tell people is that sacred dance doesn't have to be something, where it's choreographed or whatever. You can be out on the beach with your friends and listening to the music and, just getting into a groove, and you're gone, you're out, you're finished. You're not even thinking about anything.
Mm.
You're really connected, and the people that you're dancing with, that are there with you, there's that experience that, again, research really shows that that experience affects us emotionally, spiritually, neuroscientifically, right? So, yes, I mean, and how you see these people do these flash dances like in airports. Of course, nowadays we have COVID and there's a little bit of a sort of holdback on that. But
Mm.
those big concerts and flash dances, mob dances, out at the club, on the beach, any of that, that's sacred.
Mm.
That's sacred. And for anyone to say differently, I would have a really fun time arguing with them.
Wow. So you would consider basically all types of dancing as sacred. Is that right? Like, is there a difference between dancing and sacred dancing, or is all dance sacred?
Well, it becomes sacred depending on your perspective, right? So if you are in a club, or you're on a beach, or in a rave, you're at a flash dance, or you're in your basement with your sisters and brothers or whatever, or you're by yourself and you're really into that trance, that's a sacred space.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. So it's I know what you mean. When I was younger and single, I would go to these dance things, and I would be into the more of the social interaction, let's say. And then like as I got older, and I met my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and that stopped being such a focus for me. Then I mean, there was always that element of being really into the dance and enjoying it, but that became the primary focus, and then it became a much deeper and more spiritual thing when I moved away from the social and like sort of needing and wanting into just enjoying that moment. That it really did change that experience of dance for me. I suppose that that's sort of what you mean, in that if you are in it, in the dance for and experiencing that connection with the body and the universe and the presence, then that's what makes it into the sacred dance. Is that about
That
right?
that's correct. That's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I see there's some more questions here. I'd like to jump into some of them. Here, do you have any advice for people with a fear of dancing? Typically, you see people dancing at concerts and festivals, and then there are people who are watching the dancers who want to get in but have no idea what to do. So, do you have any advice for people with a fear of dancing?
Yes, I do. Just okay, two things. One, watching dance, we know this from research. Watching dance has the same can give you the same benefit of actually doing the dance. So if you're sitting in your chair or you're standing on the wall or whatever, and you're looking at people dance and they're really into it, you're benefiting from that just from a neurological connection. But the other thing is, you should think to yourself that nobody cares if you dance and you're not perfect. And that's one of the things I say in my book, and that is most of the movements that we do are what we call daily or quotidian movements. And so anyone can access it. You don't have to be a dancer. You don't have to be afraid. I mean, you can be afraid if you want, but there is no need to. So for, example, you can start slow or start small and do movements with your hand, right? You can do a circle with your hand and you can put it to music, or you can do your head. You can turn your head and kind of, you see people tapping their feet all the time. And then you just slowly bring yourself out and not worry about it. It's not like you're in a ballroom dance competition or you're not on so you think you can dance. None of that is happening. Just let go and enjoy it. And, you know, if you don't want to think of it as dance, that might be helpful. You can say you're taking high steps, and stepping over something if you're using your legs, or if you're moving your torso, if you're trying to shift in your chair, just give it a try, and you don't and just feel your body as you do it, and remember that it's really not about trying to do it perfectly.
Yeah, yeah, that's good advice. I think in general in life, it's better to let go of the idea of perfection in doing things and just enjoy doing things for their own sake. I know that that's helped me in a lot of other areas of life as well. And personally for me, actually when I was younger, I was always, I wouldn't say afraid to dance, but I didn't get into it. But when I started feeling the dance more as a way of enjoying my own body and enjoying movement and enjoying as almost like a meditation, like an internal thing rather than like just for other people, it's just for me, like
Exactly.
forgetting about what other people thought, and just enjoying it for myself. That really made me enjoy it, and I feel that can also help people, who have fear of dancing, to reframe it sort of as something that's internal and enjoyable for oneself rather than something that they're doing as a performance for others. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, I like that. Another question from the audience. Okay. As someone who has written several books, including textbooks on the subject of money and spirituality, what is your advice for someone who's feeling conflicted about making money and pursuing a spiritual lifestyle simultaneously? This is actually interesting because it kind of ties back into our conversation before about how the in Hawaii, some of the there's a two different traditions where where there's sort of two different pushes in different directions. One is to maintain the integrity of the spiritual traditions, and the other is to monetize it and export it. So yeah, I guess this question from the audience is like, what is your advice for someone who's feeling conflicted about making money and pursuing a spiritual lifestyle simultaneously, and maybe even combining making money with spirituality?
Yeah, that's a good question. And um, let me say one more thing about the previous question, though. Um, you know, I think when you're talking about dancing, you should really just not take ourselves. We should not take ourselves so seriously. That'll help. But to this question,
Mm.
I think I've heard a lot about change your thinking, think and grow rich. These things. Um, and what I want to say is the relationship that you have with money is really what I think is the key. For me, I have really walked in the two worlds, I guess, and I've come to conclude that money is good. You must have money in order to live. This is the dimension that we are on here on this planet right now. We are really having to have, income, money, whatever you want to call it. There are definitely societies where bartering and other types of exchange medium are available, but really, in the West, it's about money. And I think what we have to do is really just embrace the fact that when you're doing a spiritual journey, the decision about what you offer to others is where your integrity lies. And how you receive benefits back in the form of money is also where your integrity lies. So, one of the things that the Buddhists really talk about is they talk about, not just the Buddhists, but many people, right livelihood,
Mm.
right? What is the right livelihood for you? And in that world, people talk about, well, how do you benefit? How do you have compassion? How do you save all beings in the job that you have? And you can think about it that way. But there's also people who are, working in positions that they really hate because they have to do what they feel for the money. So making a mental shift in your belief system about what money means and how it works in your life and how you approach it are ways to get out of that conundrum. And for me, I've done the same thing. I've been very much okay, well, this is really priority to me to make this, bring this work out, to have it available. I want to do it. I don't want to spend my time doing other things. And part of that happens too as you get older. I'm like, I don't want to spend my time doing that. So there's lots of books, lots of exercises, lots of ways to sort of hone in on what's truly your heart's desire and how you're going to go about, walking in that direction. And in fact, Sacred Dance Meditation has themes in our book about how to really address that through connecting sacred dance to your intention.
Mm.
And, nobody wants to, you know, nobody wants to like be hungry and not have means to live. So you kind of have to work it on both ends and have a plan.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, running Meditation Magazine, it's always something that I think about, the combination of spirituality and money. And I think that it's just a by nature of living in a capitalist society, like if you're going to do anything, you need to receive money in order to be able to continue doing it. So yeah, I can see how, you know, that there's these ancient traditions of like monks who aren't allowed to touch money and things like that, and I could see how there's some uh, maybe some conflict there, but in our society, I think it's just the way it has to be. One last question before we sort of wrap this up, or one last sort of observation. I I think one of the most powerful experiences I've had in life in spirituality is, you know, and I meditate a lot. So I this is saying something. Some of the most powerful experiences I've had are dancing at music festivals, especially outdoors. And I think part of it, when we were talking earlier about how, you know, dancing with a lot of people at the same time, like that there's something special to that. I think that a big part of it is just seeing everyone in and being with everyone in the same sort of state, and it's almost like an ecstasy, like a certain kind of ecstasy that you get from that, where you're experiencing this connection with the universe and with yourself and these emotions, and you see everyone else around you also experiencing that. Is that something that you've seen in the cultures that you've studied, in terms of like this collective experience of almost like a transcendence and like ecstasy?
Really great question. So, first, let me just say that if many of the sacred dances that are discussed in my book, you'll find that from anthropological and archaeological perspective, many of them were done outdoors. Their temples were outdoors, the sacred dance spaces were outdoors, and they were vast. And so people came and they danced in these spaces, and they did it as part of, in many cases, a part of festivals, although, you know, or sacred ceremonies. You know, we call it, they're looking at festivals nowadays as a title, but just think about the celebratory, you know, the mass celebratory practices of like the Olmecs, or, you know, the people who were in the Hawaiian tradition, or, you know, people that are, you know, from China and Japan, all over the world. They were just huge celebrations, celebrating harvest, celebrating birth, celebrating death, so, you know, celebrating all sorts of positives, and what we call positives, and life transitions and rites of passage and so forth. You know, it was really, if you think about it, it was sort of a party. You know, let's celebrate everything in that kind of thinking. And so, yes, being together, having that trance experience with other people as part of it. And when we look at the Japanese sacred dance, we call them epiphanies. There's epiphanies. And with these sacred dances, the idea is to create these epiphanies that happen in your body and in your community. So, you know, you can't necessarily plan them, but you can bring about the circumstances by which the value and the volume of them are more prominent, right? So the more opportunities you have for these epiphanies and these open spaces, celebrating, dealing with the space that you're in, loving the earth, realizing the cosmos, knowing that the people are there, life is a process, you can, of course, really just find this as an ecstatic moment, if you will. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, yeah, we have about 5 more minutes. I wanted to touch on one last thing that's really coming up in my mind when I think about these festivals. So with the festivals, you have sort of, in my way of looking at it, there's sort of like, I guess, four elements. There's the mind that, well, there's the, first of all, there's the dancing and the music. Those are the first two elements that are the most like obvious. Oh, and then there's people. So that's the third element. Let's say there's the fourth element, let's say, is the meditative mind, which is, being in the practice of the dancing and experiencing the universe and the meditation. And then in current like festivals, I would say that there's I'm going up to sixth element, which is which is a controversial one, which is using external substances to tweak the conscious what do you call it, types of
Mhm.
consciousness that people can experience at these festivals. So you can say that, maybe call them psychedelics, or things like MDMA, Molly, which has become very popular in dancing in the past few decades, and other things like psilocybin and others, that allow people to access different types of consciousness. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that you feel is helpful in any way or harmful, or do you feel like that, there's pros and cons on both sides?
That's a really cool question too. And if you some of the sacred dance cultures that are in my book, there's a discussion of using these herbal um, applications to enhance your experience. And my position on that is, you know, it's a personal choice, and that anyone can make. I only suggest that if people are going to do that, that they know what they're doing, that they are sourcing really high quality, you know, uh, materials, let's call them, and that they're pure, and they are able to handle whatever they are embarking upon.
Mm,
I don't have a people do whatever they do, so it's up to them. But in many of our cultures that we've studied, that is a process. That is something that was used for people to help them connect with higher levels of spirituality, and make different kinds of connections with gods and other spirits,
mm,
uh, as part of not being, like I said earlier, not being that we know everything in our experience right now as we see it, and being humble enough to say that, you know what, I don't know everything, and here's a way that I might be able to learn something. So, yeah, if you want to do that, that's a personal choice.
mm. What in the cultures that you were studying? I know, for example, ibogaine was used like iboga was used in Africa, and different psychedelic plant medicines were used in different cultures for spiritual purposes. In terms of dance specifically, do you know of any cultures, these ancient cultures that used and current cultures that used these psychedelic compounds in conjunction with dance?
Well, right. I mean, if so, I'm just referring to the table of contents so I can let you know. But yes, I mean, the Egyptians and the Olmecs and the Mesoamericans, and of course
Mm,
the Native Americans of Northern California, the Australians, the Asians, the Indian, everyone. I
mm,
mean, it's again one of those questions like earlier. What have they been? What are the? Is it a linear process, or was it sort of happening simultaneously?
mhm.
And people were connected to their flora and fauna, and they knew what they could use to help. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah. It has dance and sort of these medicines have been connected all around the world for uh, eons. So
Yeah.
that's pretty amazing to understand that, and to recognize how these cultures have developed. Um, do you think, by the way, just like as a to wrap this up, do you think that these things did develop independently of each other, or that there was some original creator of it? I know you were talking about UFOs earlier, about it being like an alien influence, but do you think that uh, that there's something in human nature that has given rise to this in all these different places?
I do think so. I mean, when you go and you look at some of the creation myths, if you want to call them that, for these cultures, everyone has like, where is the world navel, right? Where
Mm,
is it? Everyone, each of them has that. and each culture tried to figure that out. And you
Hmm.
know, and if you really kind of take the time to examine this notion, there may be a world navel from which all of these cultures originated from. But
Hmm.
you know, um, they were so far, I mean, again, I'm saying this from the perspective of what I know today as we talk about historiography, right?
Hmm.
Maybe then there were ways that they communicated with other people on the other side of the planet, and we're just taking for granted that that wasn't a possibility because of the
Hmm.
distances. But perhaps there were.
Wow.
So it's too coincidental for them all to have it for it to be something that is a linear um, phenomenon, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. So that's fascinating. So it's been really amazing to have you on our podcast and
Thank you.
doing this interview for Meditation Magazine. I'm really surprised by how personally fascinating I found this conversation. I kind of like to it. I didn't know that much about you, but I really your depth of wisdom and intelligence and knowledge, and the way that you were able to sort of connect spirituality, dance, and all these ancient cultures is very profound and beautiful. So thank you for being here, and I'm sure that we will connect again in the future to have future conversations.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Have a beautiful day.